Everywhere you look, something terrible is happening. A city burns in the distance, a man is dragged toward a coffin, and a king clutches gold while death stands quietly beside him. Across the landscape, skeletons move through the world of the living like soldiers returning from war. And the strangest part is that the painting never feels chaotic. It feels planned, deliberate, as though the end of humanity is unfolding exactly as it was always meant to. For more than 400 years, viewers have continued returning to the triumph of death, not simply because it is violent, but because there is something disturbingly familiar hidden inside it. The deeper you look into the painting, the more unsettling details begin to emerge from the darkness, and slowly, the image stops feeling like a medieval vision of death and starts feeling like a reflection of humanity itself. The painting was created in 1562 by Pieter Bruegel the Elder during a period when Europe was consumed by fear. War spread across entire nations, disease returned again and again without warning, and public executions were treated almost like spectacles. Even generations after the Black Death had devastated Europe, the memory of mass death still haunted the continent like a shadow that never completely disappeared. To people living during this period, death was not distant or abstract. It was visible everywhere. And perhaps that is why this painting still feels so unsettling centuries later, because Bruegel does not paint death as a sudden tragedy or isolated event. Instead, he paints it as something already woven into everyday life, something silently moving through society long before people are willing to acknowledge it. At first glance, the painting seems almost impossible to fully understand because your eyes are constantly pulled from one scene to another. A horse carries a skeleton rider across the battlefield. Bodies lie scattered across barren earth, and smoke rises endlessly into the sky while ships sink silently in the distance behind them. There is no safe corner anywhere inside the painting. Even the landscape itself appears lifeless. But one of the most remarkable things about the painting is how carefully Bruegel controls the chaos. Nearly every section of the canvas contains movement, and yet your eyes are constantly guided across the painting in deliberate ways. The lines of the marching skeletons pull the viewer deeper into the destruction, while the fires spreading across the horizon create a visual rhythm that makes the apocalypse feel endless. Bruegel fills the painting with tiny details, but he never allows the image to collapse into confusion. Instead, the chaos feels organized, almost orchestrated. The pale white skeletons stand out sharply against the darker earth tones and smoky skies, making death impossible to ignore no matter where your eyes settle. Even the composition itself seems designed to trap the viewer inside the painting, because there is no true resting point anywhere on the canvas. Your eyes keep searching, and every new detail reveals another scene of suffering. The skeletons are not mindless creatures acting in chaos. They move with purpose. Some carry weapons, others ring bells, drag carts filled with skulls, or force terrified people into giant coffin-like structures. There is something deeply cold about the way Bruegel paints them. They show no rage, no emotion, and no mercy. What remains instead is a feeling of inevitability, and no one escapes it. Kings die beside peasants, soldiers collapse beside priests, and the wealthy cling desperately to gold, while death approaches them anyway. Even religion itself appears powerless, as churches stand surrounded by destruction while skeleton armies continue moving across the land uninterrupted. Bruegel's technical control becomes even more impressive the longer you study the painting. Instead of focusing on one central scene, he layers dozens of separate narratives across the canvas at the same time. Every small section, feels almost like its own miniature painting, filled with expressions, movement, and symbolism. This density is part of what makes the image feel so alive. The viewer is not simply looking at the painting. They are exploring it. And the deeper that exploration goes, the more psychologically uncomfortable the painting becomes, because hidden beneath all the horror is a much more uncomfortable idea. Human beings continue living as though death only happens to other people. One of the most haunting moments in the painting appears near the lower corner, where a man and woman sit together listening to music while the world collapses around them. At first, the scene almost feels peaceful, and the couple appears completely absorbed in each other, unaware of the chaos spreading across the landscape behind them. But standing directly beside them is a skeleton, quietly watching, almost waiting for the moment the couple finally notices. And suddenly, the painting begins to feel strangely modern, because even when surrounded by destruction, people still cling to beauty, pleasure, routine, and distraction. Anything that allows them to forget how fragile life really is. Bruegel reinforces this psychologically through the composition itself. While the background is filled with fire, smoke, and death, the lovers are painted with a strange intimacy that immediately draws the eye toward them. For a brief moment, the viewer almost forgets the apocalypse unfolding around them, just as the couple themselves seem to. That idea connects to a much older tradition in medieval Christian art known as memento mori, a Latin phrase that means, remember that you must die. Throughout Europe, artists filled paintings with skulls, dying candles, and hourglasses as reminders that life was temporary. But Bruegel pushes this idea further than almost anyone before him. This is not simply a warning about death. It is a vision of death consuming the entire world, and the longer you stare into the painting, the stranger it becomes. A dog feeds on corpses in the foreground while skeletons mock the living with musical instruments, and fires spread endlessly across distant cities while human beings continue fighting battles they have already lost. The painting begins to feel less like a story from the past and more like a nightmare humanity keeps repeating throughout history. The dense symbolism, the overwhelming chaos, the horrifying imagery that fills nearly every corner of the canvas, and that is what makes the triumph of death feel so timeless, because the fears hidden inside the painting never truly disappeared. War changes, disease changes, empires rise and collapse, but fear itself remains remarkably similar across every generation. And perhaps that is the true horror hidden inside the painting, not the skeletons, not the fires, not even the destruction itself, but the realization that every generation believes it is safe, right until the moment